nightmares in my head. I fear that the thoughts build up until I can't hear, that my mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper.
Hey guys, it's April and welcome back to my channel. I've got my bachelor's degree in criminal justice and a minor in psychology, and I am going to say that for the next 12 videos because I'm just so proud of myself. On top of that, I'm a board member for a nonprofit called Voices for the Silenced, and we help you get resources for missing loved ones that you have. So if you do have a missing loved one in the West Virginia or surrounding areas, please get a hold of us and we'll do what we can. And I know, here we are with another Sodder children video, but hear me out. When I posted my Sodder children video from a few months ago, I think it was a few months ago at this point, a family member named Miranda Weeks got a hold of me and let me know that her and another family member had actually been doing some digging on this case throughout the years, and that a lot of my information was actually wrong. Now, of course, all my sources were linked in the video below, and I kind of just went with the most common story. She definitely let me know and explained to me that there's just a lot in the media that wasn't exactly accurate when it came to her family. So I only thought it was right to come to you with a corrections video with the information that her and Jenny Henthorne has found. Now, this is going to kind of be more reactionary because I want to correct the things I said that were wrong. I hate to think that I put any misinformation out there, and I'm almost positive Miranda is so sick of hearing me say I'm sorry for that. Hey Miranda, I know you're watching. So I only think it's fair to come to you and tell you at least most of what they found. There is absolutely no way I could cover everything that they found. So I really tried to focus on the things that I thought would show you what I got wrong and correct the narrative I put out there. Now, Jenny Henthorne is Sylvia's daughter. She has been digging into this for quite a few years from what I understand. I do think there were some breaks on and off, especially around Sylvia's death, but for the most part, Jenny has put a lot of legwork into this case. Now, like I said, Miranda is also a Sodder family member, so she has also kind of taken on this role to really dig into this case and find out what happened to her family. Now, Miranda is a little bit farther removed. She is George and Jenny's great-great-granddaughter, and she was Joe Sodder's great-granddaughter. Now, she has obviously grown up around the Sodder family. She was telling me stories about things she remembered of Joe and things that her family talked about when she was younger and growing up. But like I said, both of them have really dug into this case, and they are seriously the reason I believe this Sodder family story is just never going to die. And I'm telling you, Miranda might actually solve this case if we let her just do her thing and keep digging. Now, like I said, there is like absolutely no way in the world I could cover everything that Jenny and Miranda have found, but I do want to let you know that there is a Creepalachia episode. You can either listen to it as a podcast or come on YouTube here and look it up. Miranda did go on his show and talk a lot about this. So if you really want to hear a lot of what she has to say and a lot more information than what's going to be in this, go check out that video and listen for yourself. Listen to a family member talk themselves. I will have that linked below, and I'll try to remember to put a tag on the screen for that video. Now, this is where I kind of fell in short with my research. We talked a lot about how case coverage just is wrong. There's a lot of misinformation out there. I personally dug far and wide for pretty much anything I could find on the internet, websites, YouTube videos, podcasts, like anything like that, to really figure out what happened to the Sodder children. And there was just one narrative that was always pushed. That just wasn't correct. So that is absolutely my fault. I do want to point out that even some of the official documents are really sketchy to believe. Miranda, and I think Jenny has too, I just know Miranda has talked openly to me about how she did her research. They would take the documents and like official reports and stuff, and they would try to compare them to newspapers and other reports that they wrote about certain subjects and see if they matched. A lot of the time they don't. But, you know, it was a really good way for them to kind of figure out who's telling the truth, who's not, and at least be able to put two narratives together on what the police were trying to say and what might have actually happened. Well, in my previous video, I get heated talking about these officials that were in charge of this case, and I have to let you know that rage has almost grown more since I found out more about this case, if that's even possible. Bear with me, I do get a tiny bit aggravated talking about this because I cannot believe it was handled this way. This should have been a cut and dry case, and it just wasn't, for many reasons. But yes, so let's just get right in and let me show you what exactly I got wrong in this case and give you some more information so you know this case a little better. I'm gonna first talk about the father, George Sodder. His name was Giorgio Sodder, and he was born in Tula, Sardinia, Italy in 1895. Now, he came with his brother to the United States in 1908 when he was only 13 years old. His brother actually went back to Italy as soon as they hit Ellis Island, but Giorgio did end up staying, in which he changed his name to George Sodder. George Sodder actually immigrated here in 1911. I think I said 1908 at first, but it was 1911. George, when he was alive, never really talked about why he came to America. We're not sure if there was problems or it was like a lot of immigrants where he just wanted a better opportunity for himself. We do know, and we'll talk about it a little later, that he was not agreeing government-wise what was going on in Italy. He did not like Mussolini, so that could be a driving factor, but he just never confirmed any reason as to why he came here. Now, at this time, it was while Mussolini was doing his thing, and so there were a lot of people that did not enjoy hearing George Sodder being so critical of Mussolini, because he had a lot of followers. Now, when he came over here, he did settle into like an Italian immigrant community, and so a lot of them did support Mussolini, and he rubbed people the wrong way, not liking him. Now, the first thing I could find that he found for work was in Pennsylvania working the railroads. He would bring water and other supplies to workers as they needed it. Now, a few years later, he did end up going to Smithers, West Virginia, which he got a driving job with like a truck company. This drove him to actually start his own trucking company. And with this job, he really helped bring fill dirt to construction sites and help kind of take away and bring stuff to coal mines. Now, once he was settled in this area, he did go to a music store and meet his future wife, Jenny Capriani. First of all, I said it was a music store. I say it's a music store because the music store was called the Music Box. Miranda did tell me on the phone that it's more like a general store, not a music store. And she also said she wasn't necessarily sure if it was called the Music Box when Jenny worked there and when George met Jenny, but it wasn't a music store. It was more like a general store. I also want to point out that it was proven by draft cards, I think, that George was taking all this money that he was earning from coming over here into America and sending it back to his family. Maybe not all of it, but you know, most of it. That was pretty normal for immigrants at the time. And honestly, if you talk to a lot of immigrants here now, you still hear that same story. He was coming here to work and then sending whatever money he could home. Now, once he got to Smithers, I think I did talk about him working in the coal mines, but he also was a taxi driver. I know it's kind of a small detail, but it's something else that was written that I didn't have in there. Now, once he was settled in this area, he did go to a music store and meet his future wife, Jenny Capriani. She was the music store owner's daughter, and she also lived in Smithers and had immigrated from Italy when she was younger. Okay, first of all, last name completely butchered. It's Cipriani, not Capriani. I don't even know where I got that, to be quite honest. I know I had to listen to it somewhere, but there's a little bit more of Jenny's story that I couldn't find that I wanted to put in here. Like I said, she did immigrate here from Italy, and she had about 2 brothers and 4 sisters, I believe. And she immigrated here around 1904. She lived in multiple places too. They had actually also lived in Pennsylvania for a short time, and I'm pretty sure when her and George met, they were meeting in Smithers. They both lived there at the time. And they ended up getting married in 1922, and I'm pretty sure they moved out of Smithers in 1935. They did end up getting married in 1922, and they had 10 children. 10. I know that was normal back then, but I don't think I'm ever going to get used to hearing that people would have 10 kids. My grandpa was one of 13, and I just, no. No, two's enough. And they did end up getting a reputation as one of the most well-respected middle-class families in this area. They ended up moving to Fayetteville, West Virginia, and it had a dense Italian immigrant population. Before they moved to Fayetteville, they only had 7 children at the time. They had John, Joe, Marion, George Jr., which you are going to know as Ted. That's what he was called, so that's what I'll call him for the rest of this time. Maurice, Martha, and Lewis. I think Lewis was the last one. So something that's not really talked about that much at all when they lived in Smithers that, let me just say, I believe is a major detail, I can't believe it's been lost over time, is that George worked for a company called Giannullo and Company. Now, I'm going to butcher these names. Now, Forenzo and Cliente Giannullo were brothers, and they owned this. Now, the way Miranda explained it to me, it was almost, I guess, like a department store. Like, maybe it was a store and, like, mini stores underneath. So it's thought that he might not work directly for Cliente, but only Forenzo, who I am just going to call Giannullo from now on. I am not trying to pronounce that name the whole time. But yeah, so he worked mostly for Giannullo. Now, they didn't just move to Fayetteville and buy a house. They bought land and built a house. It was 2 stories, 8 rooms with a basement. Now, his boss, Giannullo, had co-signed for this loan for him to be able to build his house for his family. But the deal was that Giannullo would be the beneficiary for anything that happened insurance-wise to his house. And George did agree because he needed this house built for his family. We know that later on it even expands more. So he did. He let Giannullo be the beneficiary on the home insurance. Once he made it to Fayetteville, he did end up buying a trucking company, and John and Joe really helped with his business, and then Jenny ran the books for the business. And so they ended up titling it at some point Sodder's Trucking Company. Now, in October 1945, there was a salesman that came to their door. Now, he was trying to sell them insurance, but when he realized George was not going to buy anything, he got extremely hostile. Your goddamn house is going up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed. You're going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini. So yeah, that's a little freaky, right? Especially if you already know the whole story. So Giannullo did have an insurance salesman named Roger Long go to the Sodder's house. He did try to convince George to not only up his home insurance, but to get life insurance on all the children. George said no for whatever reason. He said no. And that was when Giannullo came to the house, and he was the one who said that quote, not the insurance salesman, which is almost scarier, right? But the quote actually was, "I see you have refused to take out insurance and refused to sign papers to settle Mrs. Sodder's father's estate. Your goddamn house is going to go up in smoke, and your children are going to be destroyed, and you are going to be paid for the dirty remarks you have been making about Mussolini." And ended up coming to their house looking for work. For some reason, they walked to the back of the house to where the 2 fuse boxes were. Now, this guy told George those are going to cause a fire one day. Now, George had these rewired and redone recently, and he had even had the local electric company come out and deem everything safe. Pretty much right before this happened, very close to when this happened. So that was a little weird, because why would he say that? All of this was new. Now, a few weeks before Christmas, George's older sons noticed that there was this car parked near the main highway in town. And it looked like the people in this car were watching the young Sodder kids walk home from school. Okay, so actually, there's not really that much wrong about them having someone watch them like a few weeks before Christmas, but Miranda said that it was a week before Christmas, not a few weeks. Like, it was just a week that this car was sitting around watching these children come home from school. When Christmas Eve came around in 1945, George, Jenny, and George Jr. had worked all day, but the family wanted to celebrate on Christmas Eve. Now, Marion had worked in a dime store in Fayetteville, and when she came home, she had gotten some things for some of the children at the store for their Christmas presents. Now, she wanted to surprise Martha, little little Jenny and Betty with something she had gotten from her store for Christmas when she got home. And they were so excited to play with this stuff that they had asked the mom, Jenny, if they could stay up a little longer. And she said, yes, as long as Maurice and Lewis go out and handle the animals and do their chores, you guys can stay up and go to bed when you feel like it. Now, George, John, and George Jr. were already asleep even when this conversation happened. Now, Jenny ended up taking Sylvia to bed with them. And like I said, Joe was in the military off doing his thing with World War II, so he was never home during this. Now, at 12:30 a.m., Jenny woke up to the phone ringing. Now, she went downstairs to answer the phone, and it was a lady she didn't recognize the voice of. This person did ask for someone that Jenny didn't know who they were, so they kind of chalked it up to a wrong number. It did sound like there was like a party going on in the background of this call, and Jenny had said it was a little hard to hear what she was saying. We do know now that that call actually came from the tavern down the street. So it does make sense that it sounds like there was a party in the background because they were at like a literal bar. Jenny went into the living room to check everything out, and the front door was unlocked. The curtains were still open, which was unusual. They usually close them at nighttime, and the lights were still on. Now, Marion was asleep on the couch, so she did think that maybe the younger kids just went to bed. They didn't really think to do all that, to shut the house down for the night. So Jenny went over there, locked the door, turned the lights off, pulled the curtains closed, and went back to bed. Now, just 30 minutes later, at like 1 a.m., Jenny wakes up to a loud bang that hit the roof, and then it sounded like something rolled off of it. But she didn't hear anything else after that, so she ended up just going back to sleep. But then just an hour later, at 2 a.m., Jenny woke up to the smell of smoke. She actually didn't smell smoke at 2 a.m., it was 1 a.m. But then just an hour later, at 2 a.m., Jenny woke up to the smell of smoke. She kind of walked around to figure out what was happening and realized George's office was on fire. And when she walked around to kind of figure out where this fire was, she realized that it was in George's office. There was the fire near the telephone and fuse box. Jenny woke George up real fast, and Jenny grabbed Sylvia and got out of that house. She did yell for George. That did happen, but she actually went into the living room and woke Marion up because Marion was sleeping on the couch, and she got Marion to get Sylvia. Jenny then was yelling upstairs to try to get the children awake, but she was not the one that went to go grab Sylvia. George woke John and George Jr. up, and I think it was understood that they were going to wake the younger kids up. Now, John allegedly went up to the attic to wake them up, but there also was rumors that he just stood at the bottom of the stairs and yelled up to them. So actually, John and, well, I say George Jr., but Ted was asleep upstairs. So Jenny was yelling upstairs. That's what triggered John and Ted to wake up. So when they woke up, they're not really sure if John tried to shake them awake or just yell for them to get awake. But either way, I think John was also in the war, so he might have had some like PTSD things going on. It's just an adrenaline situation, like your house is on fire. So I don't really blame him for not knowing if he tried to shake them awake or get them like, or just yell for them awake. But they weren't downstairs. Like, he didn't just yell upstairs. Like, if he was yelling for them, he was yelling like with everyone, like in the room with the boys, because the boys shared one room and the girls shared one room. I did ask Miranda if she had ever heard if John or Ted remembered the boys being in that room, like Maurice and Lewis. But I mean, it was such a high tense situation. I don't know if they really would remember, because supposedly at this time the stairs were already on fire. George, Jenny, John Jr., Marion, and Sylvia all made it out of the house alive. But they were just sitting there screaming at the kids upstairs because they had not left the house yet. And these children were Maurice, Martha, Lewis, little Jenny, and Betty. And they never even heard a word from these children, not screaming upstairs, nothing. Now, the phone lines in the house were not working, so Marion ran to a neighbor's house to try to call for help. But they just could not get a hold of an operator. It wasn't as sufficient as nowadays is. Now, one of the neighbors also tried to call but couldn't get a hold of the operator either. So the neighbor tried to drive into town to find the fire chief, F.J. Morris. I still feel the exact same as I do about this fire chief. But there's a little bit more to the story about whoever reached out to Fire Chief Morris. There was someone coming home from work named Thomas Smith, and he at first actually went to the tavern to try to call the fire department. Fire department wasn't answering. Now, the owners of the tavern, I'm only bringing up because their names come up a little later, is Lonnie Johnson and Jeff Atkins. So remember them. They're the tavern owners. So Thomas Smith goes to the tavern to call for the fire department, and they're told that their phone was out of order. Even though we know now that The call earlier to the house was from the tavern. Who knows? I guess maybe something happened in between. Thomas Smith then drove to Fayetteville and literally drove to the fire chief's house. Fire Chief Morris allegedly said that he already knew. So Thomas was like, okay, well, are you coming? Like, are you going to help? And Fire Chief Morris allegedly said he didn't know. Well, Thomas then told him, like, there are children in this fire. And he was just like, oh, I know. Not a care in the world. So this guy went back to the fire. And by this point, unfortunately, the fire had destroyed the whole house. So he ended up just coming home for the night. And I do think he went back the next morning. So the neighbor tried to drive into town to find the fire chief, F.J. Morris. Now, F.J. Morris started calling his people, but they did like a phone tree type calling system. So he would call someone, then that person would call another firefighter, then that person would call another firefighter, and so on. And now I want to point out that the fire department was only 2.5 miles away from the Sodder home. 2.5 miles. Not very far at all. But this was a volunteer fire department. And once they got to the fire department, they really didn't have all the equipment they needed. I also want to point out that the fire chief himself didn't know how to drive the trucks, so he had to wait for other firefighters to even get there. What fire chief? Please tell me that's different now. Please tell me fire chiefs know how to work all equipment. Like, seriously, what the hell? What the hell? It took this fire department 7.5 hours to go 2.5 miles to this family's house. Can someone explain to me why it takes 7.5 hours to get to a fire that's 2.5 miles away from you? I need someone to explain that to me like I'm 5, because I just don't get it. Once they got there, the house had actually burned down in 45 minutes, so they were just completely too late. So, since the family had 7.5 hours to kill before they got there, George really did try absolutely everything to save his children. He went inside the house, but he just couldn't see anything. It was filled with smoke. So George tried to climb the outside of the house, and he even did this barefoot. Now, he did try to break a window, but ended up cutting his arm actually really bad. It was bleeding everywhere, and his throat was starting to get really, really sore from just screaming for his children. Now, him, George Jr., and John tried to get the ladder to put up towards the window to maybe make it easier to get the children out, but this ladder was not where they usually kept it. So he went to the water barrels to try to throw water onto the fire because the police department was still nowhere to be seen, but the barrels were completely frozen because it was the winter in West Virginia. So he thought, let me move these 2 coal trucks over to the house and I can maybe climb into the window from standing on them. Except for, even though they worked just the day before, neither of them would turn on. It is thought that George just accidentally choked these trucks way too hard. He does say in some of the statements with police officers, and I think in a news article, I could be wrong about that, he just choked him way too hard. The family just stood there and watched their house burn to the ground, just waiting hours for the police department to get there. And people that gathered to watch this fire even said they never heard any types of screams, especially children screaming. Like, there was not sounds like that coming from the house. And there wasn't any smell of like burning flesh or anything like that. So once the fire department decided to finally get their happy asses there, the only thing they could really do was dig through ashes in the basement of this house. But by 10 a.m., they just deemed there was nothing they found. There was no bones, no signs of the children, nothing. So when the fire department got their well-warranted ash chewing about what took so long, they pretty much said they just had low manpower already due to the war. There wasn't as many volunteers. And then on top of that, it was Christmas Eve. They can't force people to come work. They're volunteers. And the fire chief Morris also, again, admitted he did not know how to drive these trucks. So he had to wait for someone else to get there that knew. And what a fucking flaw it is in their fire department for the fire chief not to know how to drive the transportation. I will die on that hill. That is the dumbest thing I've ever heard. So I want to state a few different things that happened during the investigation right after the fire that wasn't really found anywhere else. There were actually quite a few that searched the debris. I'm not going to name all of them right now. And there were also quite a few things left in the debris. And what's left is really important because you've got to think they're going to try to spin the story that these children were completely cremated in this fire. So you've got to believe that all of this stuff that was found in the debris is stronger and less flammable than a human body. 5 human bodies. So they found a stove, charred utensils, fruit jars, bed springs, toys, damaged coins, coins that weren't damaged, part of a phone book, 2 steel bins, and like literal fabric. Now, George and Jenny stayed at the property pretty much the whole entire search. Now, George did have to go to the hospital by ambulance from the cut on his arm that was from the window trying to break in, because it was a pretty gnarly gash. And Jenny at some point had to take the other children to, I think, her family members to make sure they're safe, get them settled in. But I am almost positive John stayed the whole time of the search. They left around 10 a.m. So it wasn't even 2 hours that they searched this debris for the children. Fire Chief Morris said that they searched it as if it was with a fine-tooth comb, and just no remains were found. He also told the Sodder family to get a handful of dirt and have a funeral. This guy is like I just thought he was incompetent at first, but this dude is literally like just a full-blown dick too. Now, John did tell the police and newspapers that day that the fire was set. Like, he thought that day. I mean, the police never even talked to any of the witnesses that stood around and watched this house burn to the ground. Didn't talk to any of them. It wasn't until like later, if anybody was talked to. So the Sodder family started to believe that these 5 children were actually missing. They didn't think that they were in the fire. There was no signs of these children in that fire. And like I said, there was a lot of people gathering and watching the fire happen. I'm sure everyone understands that if like something's happening at our neighbor's house, we're at least peeking out the window, right? And so this woman who was watching the fire from the road said there was a car that passed during the fire that looked like there were children, and possibly the Sodder children, in that car. So there was also 2 coroner's inquests done on this house fire to kind of try to deem what happened. Prosecuting Carl Vickers set one up literally that day. Fire Chief Morris did say there were no remains found, but the 6 people that were in the jury were questionable at best. 5 of them were tied to Janutolo. So if something were to have happened because of the threat that Janutolo told the family, it was very easy that they could have swayed what happened to this house, right? His cousin Cliente was the foreman of the jury. His cousin, his business partner. And Fire Chief Morris actually was their bookkeeper. So, hello, he was also tied into this. And there were 3 other ones that 100% were tied to Janutolo. And the only other member of the jury was George's worker, his employee. And of course, it was ruled from this first inquest that these children died of smoke inhalation in the fire. Now, they did have a second inquest on literally the next day, December 26th. And Cliente did say there was absolutely no remains of these children found at all. But they tried to say that this fire happened because of the steel drums that were in the basement, because they could have been filled with gasoline. Now, George denies this. He did not keep that stuff stored down there like that, but I don't know. They just assumed that's what caused it and accelerated it, because it was a really fast burning fire. Now, there were a few things that prosecuting attorney Vickers said to the local newspapers that I want to read. There was nothing left to investigate. It was complete destruction, and the jury rendered, I think, the only possible verdict under the circumstances. So complete was the destruction that any investigation as to the cause was impossible, and the only deduction which could be made is that the fire was caused by a short circuit. Now, there was a West Virginia State Trooper, Springer, that was there the day of the fire, and he said the fire apparently began in the basement and was due to the defective wiring. It spread rapidly to all the sections of the structure. Now, that's a little different than these steel drums, right? I want to point out that the state trooper said this literally the day of the fire, and I'm pretty sure he said it to the Sodders. So this guy, before meeting with all of the people in this jury that Janutolo would have known, he didn't think it was these steel drums. He thought it was defective wiring, which, I mean, we'll cover more of that later. But it took them 2 days to try to say it was the steel drums, instead of being able to notice that someone tampered with the wires? I don't know. Like I said, there's a lot of questions, especially once you read the reports. It doesn't answer anything. It gives you even more questions. So this woman who was watching the fire from the road said there was a car that passed during the fire that looked like there were children and possibly the Sodder children in that car. So another woman that worked at a rest area between Fayetteville and Charleston said the next morning she served those kids breakfast. She saw them. She said that there was also a car outside that had a Florida license plate on it and thought maybe those two were linked. And so the ever so intelligent Fire Chief Morris said that these children must have been cremated in this fire. That's the only explanation. But again, there was never a smell of burning flesh from this fire. And I mean, everyone was around watching it, including the family. So somebody would have smelled something. That just didn't make sense. But I'm sure in ways he's just trying to cover his ass, right? What a royal fuck up. Fire Chief Morris did order George to not mess with the property at all. He wanted the state fire marshals to do their own investigation onto the property. But after 4 days of nothing, George and Jenny just couldn't stand to look at that property anymore like that. He did end up filling the basement with fill dirt and pretty much just making a memorial garden for his children, in which I think Jenny was the one that planted flowers there. On December 30th, the 5 death certificates for the children were issued, and their cause of death was the fire and asphyxiation. Now, 4 people did claim they saw the remains of these children, one of them being Jenny's brother. It's really not sure if anybody part of the investigation told George and Jenny not to fill in the basement. I think it was pretty well known that's what George wanted to do. I think because he said he didn't want people to be trampling over his children's remains if they were in there. I do know it's written later in the reports they said not to, but we're just not sure if that's like them trying to cover themselves like later on, or if they really did tell them at this time. Also, it wasn't George that filled in the fill dirt. It was Jenny's brother, JImmie. So JImmie Cipriani had came and filled that in for them. I'm not really sure if they like asked him to, but yeah, he was actually the one that filled everything in. Now, 4 people did claim they saw the remains of these children, one of them being Jenny's brother. But it is thought that this is just something that people were saying. Nobody had any documented proof, and no investigator found anything themselves. That's actually not true. There are different documents that say that remains were found, but the family was never told about it at that point, from what I understand. So again, it was like, did they write this years later to try to cover themselves? Or was this like actually something people found and were just never told? Because I'm pretty sure people had said that they'd found things. I'm pretty sure the investigators said that they just never told George and Jenny because it would just be so hard for them to handle. So if these remains really were found, you just let them not think they existed? Like, how does that make any sense? Anyways, so we're not really sure. There are people that said they saw remains, including Jenny's brother being one of them, JImmie, but we just really aren't sure if they truly were or not. Now, George and Jenny did suspect that this was arson, and they also believe that the children might have been taken by the Sicilian mafia because they were just very irritated at George's views on Mussolini. Do you think he was making that big of a deal, though, that he didn't like him for the mafia to come to a whole other country, to a small town, to steal his children and set his house on fire? Maybe. I guess maybe. Now, this case was looked into even into the early 1950s, but there was just nothing that was ever found. So law enforcement themselves were really trying to push this story that the children burned in the fire. Obviously, the Sodder family pushed back. George and Jenny did not believe that. They just really wanted them to investigate it more. So the Sodders did get a hold of a newspaper in 1948 and explain why they thought these children were not burned in the fire. There was absolutely no traces of anything that could be identified as part of the human body. The telephone wires to their house were cut. I know some of this we'll get to a little later in the video, but yeah, telephone wires were cut to their house. The step ladder was gone, and well, we find out later, found like 70 to 80 feet over an embankment from where they usually stored it. There was that person in the car watching their children getting off the bus and stuff just the week before this fire happened. And they talked about men and women who had taken this family to supposedly a motel and ate. And 3 days after this fire, 3 men and a woman came up to the Sodders' place and asked if they could see their babies. And they thought maybe this is a way for them to figure out if these parents were like catching on to anything. So they also later even documented that there were no outcries from the house at all from the children. No one could smell burning flesh. Not one person smelled burning flesh. And if you've ever smelled that, that's something you can never forget. There was that sound on the roof of something hitting before the fire started, and that weird phone call from the tavern right before the fire started too. So all of these things together really made them skeptical that their children died in this fire. Maybe they were taken. In the letter, the Sodders also wrote to the superintendent that I quoted at the very beginning of this video. They also wrote this: "We heard nothing of an investigation being made by the state police. They merely said that the fire was caused by defective wiring, which is not true, since the lights were still burning when we came out. Expert electricians said this could not have been the case." Now, it was found out later that Janudalo had actually raised their home insurance anyways, so he got to pocket $1,750 because he was the beneficiary on the home insurance. Remember that? It was paid outright to Janudalo after this fire. But the Sodder children and I think 4 different adults had checked into this hotel just a week after they went missing. The children were accompanied by 2 women and 2 men, all of Italian extraction. I do not remember the exact date. However, the entire party did register at the hotel and stayed in a large room with several beds. They registered about midnight. I tried to talk to the children in a friendly manner, but the men appeared hostile and refused to allow me to talk to these children. One of the men looked at me in a hostile manner. He turned around and began talking rapidly in Italian. Immediately, the whole party stopped talking to me. I sensed that I was being frozen out, so I said nothing more. They left the early morning. So, especially after hearing this, George and Jenny just really didn't trust what had came out of the investigation. So they really started to dig into everything the fire department was saying happened. The investigators were actually able to locate that woman that had called and had the wrong number. And it truly was a wrong number. She was at a party, but there was nothing weird about this. It truly was just a coincidence. But George and Jenny had also wanted to look into the telephone, like why it was not working when the fire happened. And a repairman came out and said that, oh, these cables were not burned in the fire. They were actually cut beforehand. And it had to be someone who was able to climb 14 feet up and then reach over 2 feet to cut this. And I think at first they thought that maybe the power lines too were cut, but Jenny pointed out later that this could not have happened because while the fire was going, especially at the beginning, their lights and stuff were still on in the house. And she said that if the lights were not on in the house, it is very possible that no one in the family would have made it out alive because they wouldn't have been able to see. Now, the ladder George and his 2 sons were trying to find right when the fire happened, that was not where they usually kept it, was found at the bottom of an embankment 15 feet away. Now, neighbors did end up coming forward saying they saw a man with a block and tackle that looked like they could have been leaving his property around the time of the fire, which made George think that that man must have messed with the engines of his truck. So the people coming from George's house right around the time of the fire that were stealing, they're actually chain hoists. I know I said block and tackle, but they're chain hoists. Those people were Lonnie Johnson and Jeff Atkins, the owners of the tavern. And they also threw these over the embankment. Now, George did put out a warrant for these 2's arrest for stealing from him. And Jeff, I'm pretty sure, just enrolled into the military and you never saw a consequence for this. And Lonnie just never appeared at court and he was fined $25. Now, Lonnie did end up admitting to cutting the phone lines. He tried to say it was during the fire and he was cutting them thinking that it would stop the fire, which makes absolutely no sense, right? But the thing is for him to cut them 14 feet up and 2 feet over, he would have had to have a ladder. And we know the ladder was gone during the fire. So he would have had to do this just right before the fire. He would have had to do all this. Like, the people that saw them there had to have seen him like right before the fire, which means they stole a chain hoist and they cut the wiring. Maybe this was the same person that cut the phone lines and they were able to track this person down. And when they found this person, he did admit to cutting the phone lines and what he thought was the power lines, but swore he had nothing to do with the fire. Now, the local coroner did say that he thought that the fire was from faulty wiring. But like I said, the Christmas lights were still working just fine during most of the fire. So could it really be faulty wiring if the electricity was still on and working? Now, in 1948, Chief Morris actually told a newspaper he didn't do a thorough search, that he just searched where the bedrooms were, and that was it. I'm pretty sure he tried to say that George stopped him searching, but like, why in the world would a father have you stop searching for their children? Anyways, he did at some point admit he did not do a thorough search for these children. Now, they did hire Detective George Swain, and he had this to say about the case. I have hunted down and talked with honest people who were first on the scene and asked them pointed questions. Did you smell any flesh burning or hear any outcries? And all those people who were there during the entire time of destruction stated they did not. The very fact they did not smell flesh gives strong evidence to the belief that the children did not perish in these flames. And at some point, George and Jenny even made a brochure that they handed out that was about their children's disappearance. It was titled, Why George Sodder of Fayetteville, West Virginia Wants to Know. And in this brochure, he says that the fire marshal actually didn't show up for 3 days after this fire. And 2 newspaper articles also said this. But the fire marshal stated in the report that they wrote in 1950 that they were there throughout the whole day. Now, the fire marshal wrote multiple reports, and let me just tell you, they were brutal. The fire marshal actually wrote 3 different reports on this, so I'm going to try to highlight the big things you need to know. The first fire marshal report was written on June 30th, 1950. They state that they have been part of this investigation since day one. We know that it's possible they didn't even show up until 3 days, so who knows. They say they interviewed every single person that would have information at this time, but we know that's not true because Lonnie Johnson wasn't even talked to until years later. And it's also mentioned that Janutolo, the person the home insurance paid out to, was actually never questioned, even though this report even mentions that their home insurance was raised right before the fire. Now, Fire Chief Morris claimed to get 2 phone calls by 12:30 about this fire that night. But the fire didn't really happen until, 2 o'clock? So was he getting premeditated phone calls for this fire? This is also one of the times that it says that John actually just called out to his siblings. He did not try to shake them awake. He just yelled for them to get out of the house because the house was on fire. They also claimed that the ladder was just moved by a family member and was never told to George Sodder, that the ladder is just not a big deal in this case at all. They also claimed that the noise on the roof was not anything more than probably a tree limb or something like that. It shouldn't be something that's looked into. It states in here too that the Sodders were completely convinced that their children died in the fire until about 1947, which we know just isn't true. It was about 6 months before they started really questioning it, probably from grief, trying to literally keep going for their other children. Like, it just takes a long time for stuff to settle in sometimes. But it wasn't 1947. They were already having questions by then. But they claim they even had a meeting with the Sodders, who had said everybody was in unison agreeing that the children died in the fire. The Sodders have been unduly confused, misled, and disturbed from the beginning by unfounded theories expressed by some of the private investigators and others, some of which were merely wild dreams and fantasies. It's also stated in this report that there were searchers that came to Elb that didn't like Fire Chief Morris's attitude, so they just ended up leaving. This is also where they tried to blame the steel drums being full of gasoline and being the reason that the fire pretty much happened. The cause of the fire has not been determined. There is no direct evidence or facts that would definitely establish the fire as incendiarism. The fire may have been of accidental origin. They also claim in this report, Jenny Cipriani states that he first knew of the fire when Janutolo called him and told him. When he arrived around 10 a.m., a random Italian man unknown to him showed him something in a tub on paper, which appeared to him to be several joints of a backbone, approximately 18 inches, with a mass of flesh attached. The person who showed him gave no comment or explanation. This document is the first time time this is mentioned, and JImmie never told George or Jenny about these alleged bones. Now, I know this is jumping ahead, but this is also discussed that Fire Chief Morris just never told the family that he found this mass in the ground. And they state, Mr. Morris cannot or will not offer any explanation for his peculiar and apparently secret handlings of the matter in not reporting and presenting to the proper persons and authorities anything he may have found in the debris such as he'd been described. And a quote of the summary of this whole report is, no motive can be found to substantiate the theory of murder or kidnapping. No insurance was carried on the children. It does not seem reasonable that the children could have left the home without some of the family being awakened, and certainly could not have been forced. If the children are alive, it seems that one of them at least would have contacted family or friends. Now, there is a second fire marshal report that went on. This one was in between 1950 and 1952, but I didn't get the exact date on this one. And this one is called Resume of Investigation on Sodder Fire. The fire marshal stated that they were called around 9 a.m. to be told about the fire that was happening, and they arrived around 12 p.m. At this time, they said that they found out that the prosecuting attorney holding an inquest, and they also claimed that they spoke to George and Jenny. They stated that they were broken up too badly to really be able to discuss anything, and they said that they made the decision to not, how did they word it? Not subject Mr. and Mrs. Sodder to any further inquiry at that time, but return later when they had regained their composure. And they even said here that they had advised George not to cover up the basement. Of course, we don't know if that's true or not, but that's what they said. George and Jenny did end up going to the fire marshal themselves and tried to talk to them. This was around the time that they found that picture of Betty in the magazine. So yeah, they were trying to present this to the fire marshal. And they said they were very much distraught. And as a result, it was very hard to get a coherent statement from them. And they also said this: when questioned as to why anyone would want to kidnap his children, he could give no real reason other than there were gangs doing just these things and selling them to persons that were childless and wanted children. When questioned further as to how anyone could remove 5 children from their beds located on the second floor of his home on Christmas Eve, bring them down the inside stairs, there being only one set of stairs in the house, and past the room where he and his wife were sleeping without being detected, his only reply is that he did not know how, only that there was a ladder outside the house against the side wall. That was not in place when he looked for it during the fire. When further questioned as to what else made him believe that the children had not perished in the fire, he replied that a girl whose name he did not know, who lived in Fayetteville, had made the statement that she had seen one of the children in question, or thought she had, in Oak Hill. When instructed to learn who this girl was and return with the information to the fire marshal's office, Sodder said that he would do so and made the statement that he tried to get the prosecuting attorney's office and the sheriff of Fayette County interested, but had been unable to do so, and he wanted help from someone. Now, the attorney general at this time did believe that the children died in this fire, but they did at least take George's statement at this point. They did try to argue that this vertebrae that was found, that we find out a little later on during the excavation, was proof that these children died in the fire, and George just wouldn't accept it, pretty much. But we do know that these vertebrae were proven not to be Maurice's, but they mentioned this vertebrae and said that George was not satisfied with this information. And they just openly talk about in this report how much that George was not really happy with this investigation at all. Investigators were assigned to help interview witnesses and run down leads submitted by Simmons for over a period of a couple of months. And it was again decided that this case was being kept agitated not because of the merits of the evidence, but that Mr. Sodder, due to his frame of mind because of his tragedy, was willing to spend his money and had done so. This old couple has allowed these private detectives to keep this case stirred up and has paid them many hundreds of dollars for investigations that have no merit. It is also the opinion that the Sodder family are being kept in constant turmoil by an unscrupulous person in effect to procure what money they can from the family. Now, there was a firefighter that was from, I think, Texas, that sent them a letter that explained to them that he worked with fires and this just did not happen to children, that he would always usually find remains. And he did give them a few examples as to cases that they could look into that was similar to theirs, like people dying in the fires, and their remains were always found. And this is the last report that the fire marshal did on the Sodder fire, from what I understand. And this was January 25th, 1952. Your investigators resumed the investigation of the above named case after a conference was held with Mr. Sodder and Sergeant N.C. Rieger of the state police in our office. Mrs. Sodder was interviewed at her home on the above date. She states that at the time of the fire, they were satisfied that the 5 children had perished in the flames. Then, about 2 months after the basement was filled in with dirt, she and her husband conjured that the children did not perish in the flames, but were kidnapped or murdered. It did say that Jenny decided that maybe something happened to her children because her neighbor did come up to her and say that her children were going to get kidnapped at some point a little after the fire. When they interviewed this person that Jenny said this to her, of course they said that never happened. They didn't have any idea what she was talking about. And in this report, prosecuting attorney had even said that he knew about the mass that we're going to talk about later that Fire Chief Morris found. Just the report before that, they said Fire Chief Morris hadn't told anybody about it. So how was prosecuting attorney Carl Vickers in awareness of this mass, if that is the case? They also interviewed Reverend Frame, and he said this. He went to the scene of the fire in the morning of December 25th, 1945, where he met the Sodder family. He held prayer with them and did his utmost to console them in their grief. While at the scene of the fire, one of the persons searching the debris handed him a part of an internal organ about the size of his fist. It appeared to him to be part of a lung and was waterlogged. He placed the mass on a piece of stovepipe near the scene and left it there. He did not remain at the scene for any length of time due to the extreme cold weather. He stated that he never made any telephone calls to the home of Mrs. Davis as alleged by various private investigators. And 4 people that they say saw the remains are JImmie Cipriani, prosecuting attorney Vickers, Fire Chief Morris, and Reverend Frame. Those are the 4 people that stated that they saw remains. Remains that nobody can get their story straight about. On June 11th, 1952, the Charleston Gazette did run an article stating that there was a $5,000 reward in the Sodder children's disappearance. This is thought to be the first newspaper to show pictures of the children. Oh my gosh, that's one thing that aggravates me to no end when you're looking up old cases like this, because evidently the pictures, other than the main one you always see of the children, were incorrect in my video. I forgot to mention that at the beginning, more in detail. But yeah, that big family picture that I used, that I cut out the pictures of all the children that weren't in the fire, all those are false. This was the first time people saw their face, from what I understand, in the newspaper. This, of course, sent them tons of tips that were completely false, had no help, but it was getting people talking about this case again. Now, around 1953, they did post another reward poster during this time. And this also just had a better description on the kids going missing. On September 10th, 1953, George put up a billboard that had the children on it, and it was for answers for their missing children. It had the children's school pictures on this, and it was right around where the fire happened. It also mentioned the $5,000 reward on it. What was their fate? Kidnapped, murdered, or are they still alive? $5,000 reward is offered by George Sodder for information leading to the recovery of any or all 5 of his missing children. These children disappeared on Christmas Eve 1945 when their home was destroyed by fire. A complete investigation of the burned premises failed to produce evidence of human bones or flesh. An affidavit has been signed by a person that she saw 4 of the 5 children in Charleston at a hotel 2 or 3 days later. They left the next day accompanied by 2 men and 2 women, although later 5 different people saw the children in Cortez, Florida. Now, sometime in 1960, there was also another billboard posted. This had double the reward, $10,000 at this point. These children were kidnapped on Christmas Eve 1945, and the house was set afire to cover this crime. For the safe return of any or all of the children, $10,000 is offered by Mr. and Mrs. Sodder. In 1966, there was a second section added to this billboard, and there's no really clear pictures of the second billboard that is posted, but it does probably read like this. A complete investigation of the burned premises failed to produce evidence of flesh or human bones. It is inconceivable to the intelligent mind that these children burned in that fire. Only a few who are interested in not having the crime solved persist in saying the children died in the fire. We would welcome at any time an opportunity to have an open discussion. However, they seem to prefer to ignore the issue. If by chance some of the ex-officials hurriedly come to the erroneous conclusion that the children died in the fire and sincerely believe in protection of helpless children, we would appreciate it if you would re-examine their consciences and lend a helping hand where it is badly needed. Respectable citizens who believe in the administration of justice for all and protection of innocent minors. Have you any suggestions as to what we can do about it? Now, after George's death, there was a third billboard erected, and it just pretty much had some updates on it. Now, they did build it way better. It was made of cinder blocks. It had like this roof over it, so you didn't get as much like sun and weather damage. And it had more of like a concrete base. And as we find out later, there is a picture that is supposedly Lewis when he's older that they put on this billboard also. Now, the local newspaper falsely reported, of course, that the children were found. They then tried to retract their statement and say only one of the children's bodies were found, which was still not true. So I'm not really sure what's going on in Fayetteville at this time, but they had some massively incompetent people. In 1947, George ended up getting a hold of the FBI and being like, please look into my children missing. Like, please just dig into this case and help us find answers. And the FBI director at the time, J. Edgar Hoover, did say this: although I would like to be of service, the matter related appears to be of local character and does not come within the investigative jurisdiction of this bureau. He also said that if the local authorities invited the FBI in or said it was okay for them to come in, he did not care to help, but it was up to them, and they absolutely refused. The amount of cases in West Virginia that the FBI is willing to help with and the police departments just refuse to invite them in is actually crazy. And to know that this has been a pattern since the first documented missing people case of West Virginia is shocking. Just absolutely shocking. Now, a bus driver had came forward that was driving through Fayetteville on Christmas Eve. He said that it looked like people were throwing balls of fire towards the Sodder house. And then a few months later, once all the snow had melted, the family had went to go visit the memorial garden or fix it up. Maybe that's when they went to plant flowers, but had came to the site of where their house burnt down. And Sylvia, the youngest Sodder child, ended up finding this thing that was like dark green, hard, and like a rubber-like ball. And when the parents looked at it, it 100% looked like a napalm pineapple bomb. And that is when George remembered that Jenny heard something hit the roof just an hour before this fire woke them up. So could this have been what hit that roof? So the only thing I want to correct on that is that I'm not necessarily sure if it's technically a napalm pineapple bomb. Miranda has described it as an incendiary device, and honestly, I just don't know the difference. I'm not great on, like war weapons, I guess. So after the fire happened, there was a lot of appliances that were still recognizable. This fire was really only for 45 minutes. There were even parts of the tin roof among the ash, and so it's thought that there would for sure be bones seen among all this if even the appliances and tin roof were around. And so JImmie really started to study cremations. She ended up talking to local employees of crematoriums, and they told her that human bones even remain after burning at 2,000 degrees Fahrenheit for 2 hours. And their house just did not burn that hot or that long. So where are her children's bones? She even started to do her own experiments to see if maybe it was possible. So she used animal bones, but the fire would consume them. They would burn around them, but it just did nothing to incinerate these bones. Nothing. Maybe char them a little bit, but still recognizable to be bones. The only thing I want to add is that I'm not really sure who she talked to. That wasn't really stated in a lot of like what Miranda was telling me. But one thing that wasn't really big is that she did these experiments and stuff while George was at work. She didn't necessarily want George to know she was doing all this and like setting fires and, you know, doing all this. So she would do this while George was at work and be able to like clean it up real quick and, you know, just kind of go on about her day. But yeah, she really did. She sat down, she did the experiments, she used different accelerants, she used different forms of catching them on fire. She did as much as she could and was never successful of cremating these bones. Now, like I said, the Sodders were a little skeptical on how this investigation was running, so they ended up hiring their own private investigator named C.C. Tinsley. He was at first able to tell the family that insurance salesman that said that their family was going to be destroyed and their house was going to catch on fire, exactly what happened, right, was on the jury to figure out what happened to their house. So this insurance salesman that threatened their house burning down and their children being destroyed was on the jury to deem this house fire an accident. Again, is anybody in this town that is part of this investigation not incompetent? Just one person, please be a beacon of light in this and give this family some type of hope. No, that person was not on the jury, but we've already talked about the jury was highly linked to Janudalo, the person that got all the money for the house once it burned down. The person that sent this insurance salesman to George's house to heighten his home insurance and get life insurance on the children. So no, it wasn't that person that was on the jury. But the jury was completely linked to the person that sent this insurance salesman to their house, which is still just sketchy in general, right? I mean, damn, his own cousin was on this jury. According to Times, West Virginian, this person used to work for or closely to George Sodder. So this insurance salesman knew him. And on top of that, their home insurance right before this fire was increased from $1,500 to $1,750 without their consent or knowledge. I'm going to take a deep breath before explaining the next dumb decision that Fire Chief Morris made in all of this. C.C. Tinsley also found out that Fire Chief Morris was talking about the fact that he buried a human heart among the rubble of the house in a dynamite box. Supposedly, Fire Chief Morris had admitted this to the local minister, and the minister ended up telling C.C. Tinsley. So George and C.C. Tinsley went to Fire Chief Morris and asked him about this. He then agreed to show them where he buried this box, and they went and dug it up. So they found the box and whatever was inside and took it to the local funeral director to look at. And when the local funeral director looked at it, he said, "This isn't a heart. This is a beef liver." And on top of that, it had never even been in a fire. So then they're looking at Fire Chief Morris like, why did you bury a beef liver where our house was on fire and then tell everybody it's a human heart? And supposedly Fire Chief Morris said that he did this to give them closure, that maybe they would find it and accept what happened to their children. Here's a shock. Maybe they could accept what happened to their children if you did literally an inkling of your job correctly. An inkling. He is most likely the main reason this will never be solved. Like, let's be real clear about that. That story couldn't get worse. It actually does. So let me tell you the full scope of this beef liver. I also want to point out, I don't know how so many sources got this name wrong, including me, obviously, but his name is not C.C. Tinsley, it's Oscar Tinsley. Let me tell you how this beef liver story actually went down. So Fire Chief Morris was telling people about this human heart that he buried on the Sodder children's property. So the Reverend Frame ended up hearing about it, and Fire Chief Morris himself told Reverend Frame that he buried it in a wooden box into the ground. I think I said a dynamite box the first time I filmed this, but we're just going to go with wooden box. So Reverend Frame had said that a heart would withstand fire. I'm not really sure why he thought that, but he did. So then Reverend Crane went and told the Sodders what was said to him about this human heart being buried in a box on their property. So then Jenny calls Fire Chief Morris and is like, hey, come show us where you buried this. He for sure did not come. Fire Chief Morris was like, no, didn't show up. So she called him again and was like, you need to come here and show me where you buried this heart on our property. And he said, but I did go where it was buried and put a stake in it. Where the house fire was not that far away from the house they lived in now. So she would have known if someone had went on their property and put a stake and there was no stake and there was no one that came onto the property. So Fire Chief Morris finally just agreed. He was going to come and show them in person where he buried this. He claimed he thought he had told the family that the heart was buried, but maybe he didn't, was exactly how he said it. He said that he could have sworn he told the family that he buried this heart, but maybe he didn't. He said that he found it the evening of the fire and he had just put it in the garage. He then found a box, wrapped the heart in brown paper and put it in the box. But George said there was no box like that around his home or property, so he's really not sure where he found this box at. Fire Chief Morris then nailed this box shut and buried it. He said he buried it because he hoped that the family would find it and it would give them the closure that they needed. Without even telling him. So in July 1947, Detective Tinsley had Fire Chief Morris come to the property and show him exactly where this was buried. So they ended up digging it up and finding that there was in fact an organ in this box. And he also stated that he wanted a receipt from the search. I don't know what that's about, but also said that he thought this was the only thing left of the Sodder children. And no law enforcement and no fire marshal showed up for this search of this human heart in the ground. Not one officer decided it might be a good idea to show up while this is happening. Not one. George and Detective Tinsley took this organ to the gay funeral home, I think in Montgomery, because they were definitely not trusting anybody in Fayetteville. And they gave the organ to the funeral home director. They didn't give any type of detail on what this was, where it came from. They just wanted him to examine it with like a clean slate mind. He said it was definitely a portion of an animal beef liver who had never been around a fire. It weighed about 4 or 5 pounds and it showed absolutely no signs of decay, which means how could it have been in the ground for almost 2 years and there's no sign of decay on it? So Detective Tinsley told this funeral director, please hold on to this organ. I want to send it to some of my colleagues in Baltimore and have them look at it too. Mr. Gay, the funeral director, did say he did not have a place that he could store this for cold storage, but what he would do is he would have his brother come and bury it and then like dig it up for whenever they want it. I don't understand. I don't understand why they keep burying this. Mr. Gay did end up embalming this organ in hopes to preserve it, and he ended up getting his brother and telling him to bury it. Now, there's a few different conflicting statements on what happens after this. In 1948, evidently, it's written down that the brother came and buried it. In 1950, though, it is written down that this organ stayed on the back porch of this funeral home for 10 days. When Detective Tinsley came back to get this beef liver, it was nowhere to be found. And evidently, because it was sitting on the back porch, the garbage man just thought it was trash and came and got it and threw it away, and it was never seen again. In August 1949, George had convinced Oscar Hunter to please supervise a new search around his house site. Oscar Hunter was a Washington, D.C. pathologist, and there really wasn't much that they found that could help, but they did find a few things. A dictionary that was one of the children's, some damaged coins, and some human vertebrae fragments. So they sent these human vertebrae fragments to the Smithsonian to get looked at, and they confirmed that these were lumbar vertebrae for a man that would be between 16 to 22 years old. Now, the missing oldest Sodder child that was a male was Maurice, and he was only 14. And yeah, I know that doesn't sound like too big of a difference, but the growth in your vertebrae, it was nearly impossible that this could have been Maurice's vertebrae, along with the fact that these vertebrae did not seem to be charred or exposed to fire at all. He also argued that if this was the children, they wouldn't just find human vertebrae fragments, they would find pretty much the whole skeleton. So again, they did not think this had anything to do with the children, and maybe it was brought in with the fill dirt that George used to fill the basement in, which is like a whole other mess of questions. Why in the world human vertebrae are in this fill dirt? But that's not what this video is about, so let's just keep it going on the Sodder children. The Smithsonian did end up giving these vertebrae back to George, but we have no idea where they are now, which is really unfortunate, because if George would have kept them, at least kept them somewhere someone would know, we could do DNA testing they didn't have in 1949, 1950 on this, but you know, it is what it is. Okay, a few corrections. They had a detective named George Swain that was helping them in this case. He was the one that kind of pushed the Smithsonian to come do another search. And it was quoted during this excavation: "The Smithsonian Institute, which frequently cooperates with the FBI in making investigations, has expressed the opinion that the bones still should be at the scene of the tragedy if the children were burned to death." Now, on August 18th, 1949, at around 8 a.m., they started this excavation. George and Jenny were there, and there was about 14 diggers. Detective Tinsley, Detective Swain were also there, and Detective Swain had 2 assistants. So there was a lot of people with a lot of eyes on everything that was happening. Oh, and the Fire Chief Marshal C.A. Raper was there. But there was no Fayette County officials that showed up to this excavation at all. The deputy sheriff did end up showing up at some point, but he was off duty. Like, he was literally just a bystander. He wasn't there to investigate. He wasn't there to document. Like, he was literally just there to see what was happening as a bystander off duty. Now, Dr. Oscar Hunter did say there is a good possibility that all the bones were not destroyed if the children were victim of more than a 3-year-old fire. They took about 3 feet of dirt up. They sifted through everything. But then Dr. Hunter did kind of come over and say, listen, don't worry about the sifting. Like, you need to be looking for like larger bones, like, you know, like the femur and that kind of thing. And around 3 p.m., there was a portion of Jenny's coat that was found, parts of upholstering, and they did find a few bones in different areas. There was 8 pieces of animal bones, and this would have been like in the northeast part of their house, and then there was 8 bones found in the southeast of the house. Now, 2 of those bones were animal bones, but then the other 6 are the vertebrae that we are talking about. George had also found inner tubing, roofing, and just other material that didn't burn in the fire, so there was a lot found in this search. And the excavation completely ended around 7:30 p.m. At the site, he thought that it could have belonged to about a 14 to 15-year-old boy, but with more examination, these bones are definitely from like a 16 to 22-year-old boy, which doesn't sound like a big difference, but there's like certain growth things that happen between 14 to 16 that are pretty prominent on your vertebrae during that time. So it is like no way possible that Maurice, who I think was 14 at the time, it was his vertebrae. There was just no way. And plus, these bones were not found where the boy's room would have been in the house. Like, it was found like on the other side, I believe. It was also ruled that these vertebrae had never seen fire, never been exposed to fire, nothing. And that, this is horrible, but these vertebrae were like forcibly removed from the spine. Not just like had a fire or anything like that, like forcibly removed. Like I said, they do believe it just came in with the fill dirt. And like I said, there is still 1,000 other questions on why these vertebrae were in fill dirt to begin with. And there was an anonymous letter that was sent to one of the officials, I think, that said that these vertebrae might have came from the Mount Hope cemeteries. Oh, that's kind of freaky, but I don't know if that's really true or not. Now, George never really did believe that these bones were Maurice's, mostly because where they were found in the house, and also like where he was, there would have been such an easier way of getting down out of the stairs and out of the house based on where they found the bones. So it just really wasn't thought to be Maurice. Like, it didn't make any sense. And plus, there was nothing else found. Detective Swain did retire shortly after this happened, and he said this: "My 3 years' work on this mystery leaves the matter unsolved in spite of the fact I worked diligently in probing every known lead in the face of utter frustration met at every turn. Many mysterious circumstances will puzzle me forever. My efforts in a large measure were prompted by sympathy for the bereaved parents, and I regret that I was unable to bring them even a crumb of solace in the bereavement." Now, Governor Oki L. Patterson did end up just sticking the knife into this family and twisting along with everyone else. Now, the governor and the state superintendent, W.E. Burkett, deemed this case hopeless and just ended up closing it. And they just pretty much said the family's grief is clouding their brains on this matter, and so they just can't accept what really happened. Now, the FBI did try to pick it up as an interstate kidnapping, mostly because I think those people were claiming that they saw them in the car, they saw them at that hotel, they ate breakfast with them, they were with some random adults, but the case was dropped 2 years later because there was just absolutely no leads. The family, of course, did their own investigation that we have talked a little about already, but they also were hanging up flyers everywhere of their missing children. They even offered a $5,000 reward for any information to get their children back, but it did end up raising to $10,000 shortly after this. And I just want you to think, $10,000 and $5,000 is a lot of money now, but think about how much money that is in 1945, 1950. That's a lot of money. In 1952, the family did end up putting up a billboard with their children's faces on it, the reward money, and a description on what the case was about. And they did put it at the house site along State Route 16. And there also was another billboard put on Route 60 near Ansted. And the one at their house site stood for nearly 40 years until Jenny's death, which was in 1989. They did end up hiring another private investigator after C.C. Tinsley, but this person just seemed to have taken their money and ran with it. Now, George and Jenny did hear of a lot of sightings of their children over the years, and I'll just go ahead and say, so I don't have to say after every single one, George looked into every single one of the sightings of their children, or if he saw things and thought it might be the children. Every single one he looked into. There was a woman from St. Louis who got a hold of them that said that she thought their daughter Martha was at a convent there. Now, someone at a Texas bar said that they had a conversation about the Christmas Eve fire with someone that she thought was the boys. Someone from Florida had told them that they were pretty sure that the children were staying with Jenny's distant relative. I think they lived in Florida also. And in 1967, a woman wrote them saying that she had talked to two of the boys, Louis and Maurice, at a bar. She said that Louis confessed that they were the Sodder children, and Sylvia's husband ended up driving down there with George to check it out. But these two boys said they were lying about being brothers. Like, they were just, I guess, messing with this girl. And like I said, George looked into all of these, and every single one was deemed not them. Okay, so talking about the children might have been in Florida. I didn't realize that there was probably more than one tip that came in that they were in Florida, but there was probably more than one. July 24th, 1951, though, they got a letter that their children might be in Cortez, Florida. This person said they saw these kids in the newspaper and was pretty sure that's what kids were down there. And it isn't a distant relative of Jenny's that lives in Florida, especially Cortez, Florida. It's her brother, Frank. So when the private investigator looked into Frank Cipriani, he noticed that, oh, he's close to the brother, JImmie Cipriani, that lived in Fayetteville, that helped fill in the basement, that lived near Jenny and George. So it kind of rang alarm bells, especially because Frank and JImmie, I'm pretty sure, operated a drag line together. So they were close. Business partners. So there was a tavern that was across from the Cipriani property that they interviewed some of the people in the tavern, and they said that, yeah, Frank actually was quite a regular to this tavern for a long time. But then he came in and he had been sent a telegram and was talking about how his family's house caught on fire. He said that he had to go up there, which people assumed was to West Virginia, because his family seemed to be doomed, that his sister's whole family was burned up. Now, he didn't say who sent him this, but it is thought to be his son Joseph Cipriani, because it is thought that his son witnessed this fire. like he saw what happened. And then there was also a couple that talked about when Frank brought in this telegram, and they said this about it. It seems he took exceptional pains to let the telegram be seen around here. They also claimed that they thought one of Frank's children was little Jenny, but that was proven to not be true. And what's crazy is he was a regular, but after this telegram, he never went back to the tavern. Never. And he never spoke about the fire again either. Frank seemed really upset, but none of the Ciprianis went to West Virginia for the funeral or anything. They didn't really get in touch with the Sodders until about a year after this happened. The owners of the bar even claimed that they thought they saw Louis Sodder, but they couldn't be 100% sure. And they definitely didn't remember seeing any of the other children. Now, another private investigator that the Sodders hired, named Troy Simmons, had held a conference that he said that he was under the impression that the children were seen at a woman named Miss Bree's house. And then after Miss Bree's, they were seen leaving in a car with a Florida license plate. Now, Mr. and Mrs. Bree said they were never at the house during the fire or even the morning after, but they did say they were close friends with JImmie and Frank Cipriani. And she did say that JImmie Cipriani did visit them in 1945, but she couldn't necessarily remember when. Now, 10 days later, the county commissioner of Cortez swore he saw the Sodder children after the fire. He also mentioned that JImmie Cipriani came to Florida every other week. But the children this man was talking about was proven to be Frank's biological children. And they did interview his wife and his children, but the county commissioner or investigators never interviewed Frank himself, which is weird, right? But whatever. Now, I know this was discussed earlier in the video, but let me wind back and put this here. Talking about the motel that the kids were seen at with the 2 men and 2 women of Italian descent. It wasn't just like a worker at that hotel. It was actually the owner, Ida Crutchfield, of the Alderson Hotel in Charleston. Now, I said in the original video that she saw all 5 children. She believes she only saw 4 out of the 5. She does believe that they were seen at this hotel about a week after the disappearance. And she said she saw 3 girls and 1 boy. And she's pretty sure it was Maurice that she didn't see. They registered at the hotel around 11 p.m. to 1 a.m. And they did get a big room with like bunk beds and like, you know, just a lot of sleeping area. The room was room 25. And like I said, it was a large room with several beds. She tried to talk to the children and the men got really hostile. I think at first I said only one was hostile, but it was definitely both of them, I think. And in August 1946, she said that she's pretty sure that there was a young boy that came to stay at the hotel again, and she thought it could be Louis Sodder. And again, this child was not allowed away from this man that they were with, and they were not allowed to really speak to her. And they ended up staying about 3 nights. And now to talk about the sighting of the 2 men in Texas that were trying to say they were Maurice and Louis, George and Sylvia's husband Grover drove down there and tried to figure out if it was Maurice and Louis. George's health was not great at this time, like at all. So Grover had to drive him like the whole way there and back. They couldn't find the actual person who told them about this, but the local law enforcement was pretty sure they knew who the 2 guys were that they had talked about. And these 2 guys obviously denied everything, said they weren't their sons, and it was pretty much a dead end. And after, not sleeping, not staying anywhere overnight, no, they just picked up and drove back home. Thank God for Grover. That is a massive drive. And then on top of that, George was not doing great. So George had to actually lay down in the back seat the whole entire ride back. Now, George did end up seeing a picture in a magazine of a young ballet dancer in New York City that he could have sworn was Betty. And he tried repeatedly to get a hold of this girl, but that girl's parents were like, yeah, absolutely not. Now, in the 1960s, Jenny had found a letter that was written to her from Kentucky. There was a picture of a young man in his mid-20s that really did actually look like Louis, and it had something written on the back of this picture that said, Louis Sodder, I love brother Frankie. The little boys, A90132 or 35. This person looks like Lewis. Even Jenny and George thought it was Lewis. They had dark curly hair, the dark brown eyes, his nose was the same, and there was like this upward tilt to his left eyebrow that was pretty similar also. Now what's weird is clearly Lewis does not have a brother named Frank or Frankie or anything like that, but he did have an uncle named Frankie. And Jenny was like, is this the relative that people are talking about that kidnapped them and is raising them in Florida? And she even accused him of it. And you got to remember that the woman who served them breakfast had even said the car that they were in was a Florida license plate. Now the Illinois, I really don't know how to say the IL. I'm trying my best. That was something not even like internet sleuths can figure out. Everyone's a little dumbfounded about that part of the statement, but 90135 is a zip code in Sicily. Now they did make changes to the billboards to have this picture now put on there because they really did believe that it could be Lewis. But the person in the photo was truly never identified, and it was never figured out who sent that letter to Jenny or why. So one thing I want to also say first of all is that George and Jenny had already commented that their mail had been opened and gone through before it ever got to their mailbox a lot of the time. And this was not different. This letter had been opened, the seal was broken on it, and this is what they had in it. You know the photo, you just saw the photo, you know the message. I'm not going to reread that. But I do want to point out that Sylvia remembered it a little different. Now, she did say that little boys is slang for little boys, but she also didn't think it said like A90. She thought it said age 32 or 35. They did hire a private investigator to go to Kentucky and figure this out, who sent this. But this is actually the investigator that I talked about a tiny bit earlier that took their money but just like vanished off the planet. So everyone does think this could have been a scam, that this could have been planted to be hired and then just, you know, a quick money scheme. I will say that Miranda was telling me about the fact that she bought this like Amazon software. And what this software does is it shows you the accuracy of like age progressed photos or if it's the same person, stuff like that. So like she had put pictures of her dad, some around the age of what Lewis's known picture is, and then pictures of her dad at the age of when this supposed Lewis picture would be. And it got about an 84% match. So it was, you know, it tested pretty well. But when she put the known picture of Lewis in there and then the picture that was sent to them, it was a less than 1% match. So even though, yeah, it does look compelling, I'll be honest with you, that was something that stumped me for a long time. I thought maybe it possibly was. Talking to Miranda and how, you know, she told me this software works and how she like dug into it, I definitely don't believe that picture is Lewis anymore. And it's devastating because I'm pretty sure Jenny did think it was Lewis until the day she died. On February 19th, 1960, Marion had written a letter to an editor about a story that was posted about 10 days ago about a house fire. This house fire had killed 4 family members. The house was also a 2-story house. There was no help sent for multiple hours in this case either. What is the deal with that, by the way? What is the deal with that? But the bodies of all 4 of these family members were found in the fire. And this is what she had to say about it. Is it possible for a farmhouse of 8 rooms to burn completely to ashes and the bodies of 4 persons to be found almost intact? Yet a smaller house burns and the law authorities say it is their belief that 5 bodies of 5 children 6 to 14 years old were completely destroyed, bones included. Now I ask you, don't you think they insult the intelligence of us and the rest of the people of West Virginia to expect us to believe such tommy rot? Or maybe this is just the safest way to keep a horrible crime undercover. Now, John Sodder never really spoke about the fire. I think he kind of chalked it up that his siblings died in there and he was just not sure why his family was dragged dragging this out any longer and not just accepting that type of closure. I do wonder, though, if he had guilt for not actually going upstairs and getting them or making sure they were coming out of the house, and that's kind of how he dealt with it, because that would be hard to think that it was your job to yell for the kids, and like none of the kids got out of the house that he was in charge of getting. George did end up dying in 1969 at 74 years old. Now, Jenny and all of the children except John continued this fight to search for the missing children, and she would only wear black as a sign of her mourning, and for the rest of her life she took care of that garden. Jenny did end up dying in 1989 at 85 years old, and this is when the main billboard on the property did end up coming down for good. Now, the grandchildren of Jenny and George have tried to keep this story alive. They do interviews, they stay on online forums, they do media coverage, local authors have talked to them, there's been blogs, even NPR has covered this, and the History Channel. There was a theory going around that the Sicilian Mafia did take the children, but it was because George owed them money and he didn't have it to pay them back, but there's never been any definitive proof of that. Ever. They do think that if the children were taken, they were taken before the fire, so they might not have even really known that was the next step. It is thought that the children probably knew the person that took them because there was no screaming or anything that would have wakened Jenny up. I mean, she woke up to the phone ringing downstairs. She would have woke up if the children were yelling. And they do think that the fire was set, so the family would panic about that and not realize that the children were missing until way later once they got a head start. If the children were taken anywhere, they do believe it was to Italy. And there also was a rumor that they tried to recruit George into the Sicilian Mafia and he declined, and this was his payment for not being a part of it. It is also possible this could just be a human trafficking scheme. John did actually make one type of comment towards this before he really just quit talking about it altogether, and he said, "Our thinking was the kidnappers might have been trying to take us all. My brother and I barely got out of the house, but you can't relive it." In 2016, firefighter Cruikshank said that George having these 55-gallon drums of gasoline around the fire could have clearly intensified it, more than what these people thought it would be. And he did say that George filling in the basement with this fill dirt could have accidentally advanced the stages of decomposition and just the cremation process altogether. I don't understand that, but I'm sure firefighter Cruikshank knows way more than Fire Chief Morris, right? The last Sodder child, Sylvia, did end up dying in 2021 at 79 years old. Her earliest memory was this fire, and her dad George would stay up so late talking theories and just really diving into this case. And she did believe until the day she died that her siblings had survived this fire. But unfortunately, most people do believe that they did die in here. There's really just no answers either way. And I just personally don't believe that they died in this fire because there was just so much that Fire Chief Morris was trying to cover up, right? It's weird. But what do you guys think? So there's just a few things I want to add. First of all, John did not believe that. I had read he did and saw a few sources that say he did. But when I was talking to Miranda, that's not true. He 100% thought something was weird about this too. I doubt it was the Sicilian Mafia. I think that's probably what the people that did this wanted you to think. One of George's business partners probably had quite a bit of motive to do it. A few things I just want to add towards the end. As you can tell, George and Jenny never quit fighting for their children. They fought until the day both of them died. Jenny didn't really leave her house very much after George passed. She wore all black all the time, but she would wear like a pink apron because she did like pink. And she did leave the billboards up until around 1975 and kept updating them like we talked about. Now, Jenny did say there was some vandalism done to the billboards. There was even a point that she was watching TV and heard a gunshot. She walked outside and there was a bullet hole around Maurice's picture in the billboard. And then there was also like small holes where people had been shooting BB guns at it too. She was asked why she didn't contact the police, especially when the billboard was being shot at. And she said this: "What's the use? If we had the right kind of law here, they would have done something 30 years ago. There's more important things than a billboard." Jenny kept doing interviews for her children until pretty much she died. She said this in one of her interviews: "I'm going to keep trying. I want this case reopened. I want my children back. I know they're alive. I want justice done and some questions answered." And as we know, Jenny did end up passing away. Sylvia was the first one in her family to ever read any reports written about her family members. And this was all the way in 2007. This happened in 1945. And the first family member to see any of the reports is 2007. And it is thought that George and Jenny never saw anything. George and Jenny, towards the end of their lives, had said multiple times they did not care who did this to their family anymore. They just wanted their children back. And in a newspaper article, they stated, the family is not particularly interested in punishing anyone. If there was foul play, they state they would be glad to waive charges or to sign any kind of release asked for, if they could only regain their children or learn what happened. Now, there is a ton of information that's new that I just unloaded on you. And I am sorry, I know this video is going to be so long. But if you have any other information, you've heard different things, you have anything that could be helpful, please get a hold of, I think it's Miranda who runs this email address, and it's 5sodderkids@gmail.com. She is even collecting photos, if you have photos of the billboards where there's not very great ones out there. If you have seen any news articles, you can send them to her, just any information, anything you have on the Sodder children, send it to that email. And now that we know everything, unfortunately, it does sound like George got himself into something deep with that business owner, right? Allegedly. I know he still has family out here, allegedly. But Janilo there's something that's going on with that. How in the world do you threaten someone that their whole house is going to burn down and their children are going to be destroyed, and then it happened, and you're connected to all the people that are looking into it somehow? And again, I know this is my third Sodder children video. It is what it is, but this is new information that I did not have access to, and I really thought it was only my duty to let you guys know what I found and what was told to me by Miranda, because Miranda has done such great work, and so has Jenny Hinthorn, on digging into this case and figuring out questions and giving us a lot more questions too, of course, but they have done so much for their family through this research and bringing the truth of this story alive. And I just really wanted to highlight everything that they have done and everything they have found, because they deserve all the recognition in the world. And thank you, Miranda, for coming to me and letting me know that I did get things wrong and there needed to be corrections, because honestly, I never want to be someone that puts misinformation out there. So I'm really glad that I had the opportunity to correct the things I said before. And thank you for letting me literally hound you about your family members for weeks now. I mean, I'm so sorry. Just thank you, Miranda, again for giving me the opportunity to correct my mistakes. And thank you guys so much for listening again. And this is crazy, right? This case just keeps getting deeper and deeper the more we look into it. And please take this as a beacon of hope that there can always be answers found, as long as you don't give up on missing loved ones and keeping their story alive. George and Jenny, this is all they wanted, was for their family story to be told and not to die when they die. They want people to be discussing it and getting answers like Miranda and Jenny are, and just really working hard, because those 5 precious children deserve it. They deserve this. You can go to Creepalachia and listen to her thoughts on her family. It's really, really important to listen to everything Miranda has too, because I couldn't fit it in all into this. And it's important to give a family member like that time to make you aware of their case. Thank you guys so much for watching. Thank you for bearing with me while I make corrections and let you know everything that I got wrong and everything that was new that needed added. And remember, I do have a Facebook page that I'm trying to help build for this platform, give you better updates, and I can share little tidbits of cases a lot easier. I'm trying to make it to 250. So go over there and like the page for me, please. And also, I do have my Instagram. I'm trying to build a little bit more too, so you can go follow that as well. And just thank you guys so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.